Hi, this is Mark with Huckleberry Records, and this is my first installment on my channel. So there will be more videos coming. If you like what's happening here, subscribe. You'll look forward to more videos, and if you have any comments or questions, I look forward to them. And I also wanted to thank Dylan with Noble Records for starting this quarantine vinyl challenge, which really got me just completely stoked about doing this. After seeing his, I watched 5 or 6 other people's and just was unconsciously creating a list of the records that I would do. So I had to do it. So let's dive right in. The first question on the Quarantine Vinyl Challenge is, what is your favorite record from your home state or city? And I'm from Portland, Oregon, and there's some good stuff here. I almost decided on Elliott Smith because I love him, but really the most amazing band that I'm enjoying right now is, and by far my favorite record is Roselip Bone. This is Blister Steel. This is their first of 3 albums. They're kind of a whiskey-soaked ranchero, epic Western punk rock band. I saw them live first, and it just blew me away. These guys kick ass. They're really raw, powerful, and talented. And they're already reaching kind of a cult status. They're really phenomenal. So if you get a chance to check them out live or on vinyl, please do. Also, for bands like this that maybe people haven't heard of or don't know about, I'm going to put some links in the information below for you to click on if you want to see more. So number 2 on the vinyl challenge is an album that you highly recommend. This just came out. This album, you know, when I started looking at all these YouTube channels, the thing that got me going the most was I was looking for people to show me records I'd missed or hadn't seen before. So I would love to discover a record that came out 30 years ago or that I had missed somehow from another country or a genre I wasn't as familiar with or whatever it is. And this album almost does that to me, even though it's brand new and it just came out. These guys, Trees Speak, they're from Tucson, Arizona, and they kind of do a krautrock sound. It's like 70s electronica. Reminds me a lot of Tangerine Dream, Noi, with elements of Pink Floyd and some Philip Glass mixed in there. We can't stop listening to this record. It completely blows my mind. And it really makes me feel like I'm listening to something from the 1970s by Tangerine Dream or something that somebody somehow had found or discovered. And again, I'll put a link to this below, but I also want to just mention in looking at this that the artwork on the cover is done by one of the musicians. His name is Daniel Martin Diaz, and I'm going to put a link to his art as well because it's just mind-blowing. It's really good stuff. So that's my recommendation. Moving on to number 3, tip for a beginner. I'm assuming we're talking about a beginning collector. So if you're getting into collecting, it's really, you'll get to know dead wax and all of the things that people put in dead wax and how important it is to determine what pressing you have, whether it's a first pressing or whether it's from Monarch or whatever it is you're trying to understand about it. But make sure you do research about that. And I have 2 albums here I'm going to show you. Elliott Smith, Either Or. This is a first pressing, and I love this album. It's one of my favorite albums. And I saw another first pressing in a record store and bought it and took it home and then was looking at it again, and it wasn't a first pressing. The details on the dead wax are all exactly the same as all the other pressings. The way that you can tell the difference is by the color of the label. And what's really happening here is that this one is not 180 grams and that the label, the yellow, is the exact same color on either side of the record. The other version that's not 180 grams doesn't have the same color on either side. And then this is another example of the same thing. Neutral Milk Hotel album. This is a first pressing I got for a song because, again, The information on the dead wax is exactly the same, and the only way you can tell the difference between this and the later version is by the weight of the vinyl. And apparently it was such a clean album and in such good shape that they just assumed at the record store that it was the newer version, and it wasn't, so I got it for a song. But so be careful and get to know your records and get to know the labels, and because I've bought things that I thought were first pressings that weren't. So be careful about that. Next, number 4, the first record that really got you into deeper music. And first, if it's the first one, I got to go back to the 60s. I had just turned 11 years old. It's 1969, and I'm going to a New Year's Eve party at a friend of my father's, and the guy has a huge house and lots of adults there having cocktails and stuff. But in the basement, his kids, who are 17, 18, are having their own little party. A bunch of hippie kids in the late 60s hanging out, and this album, The Turning Point by John Mayall, had just come out. It had just been released. This album was recorded live in the Fillmore East, like 6 months prior to being released, and it is a mind-blowing album. It's blues. There is no percussionist on the album, so it's blues acoustic with some sax and flute and guitar and bass, and of course John Mayall singing and playing harmonica. And what it did to me was there was so much blues and jazz improvisation, and they were on this night. Every single song. It's like, I don't know how they did it. It's just amazing. And on top of that, the recording of this album also was completely mind-blowing to me. Even today when I listen to it, I can't believe it's live. It's just so perfect. So if you haven't heard this, I highly recommend it. And this album really took me deeper into blues and jazz and other things that I wasn't really in touch with at 11 years old. So let's see, number 5, an obscure record people may not know about. So this band, Tone Starts Bandit. It's one word. I don't know if you can see this on the cover. It's all they made up the name. The word doesn't even exist. And you know, these guys are a lo-fi noise rock band. I don't know how else to describe it. They're definitely adventurous in their music. One of the albums has a cover version of a song from the Disney's Bambi. I mean, it's just, what they do is just out of this world, and it's very unique. I'll put a link to some of their stuff. They're also really good live. Basically, it's two members. They're brothers, and they get together and put this music together. This is their most recent album. It's a good starting place. It's one of their more accessible albums. The others, as you go further back, get kind of strange, actually. And to make it even more into the world of uniqueness, I was going through record bins. About a year ago, and pulled this album. I just saw the top of it, and it has some songs that looked kind of familiar, and I wasn't sure. And then I looked a little more closely, and it had Sorcerer, which is the name of that band, the album. And down in the very bottom, you can see it says Tone Starts Bandit in small letters down there. And so I pulled out the record, and it's blank white label. There's nothing on it. And quickly pulled out my phone and looked at the dead wax. And this album, when they toured this album, apparently the artwork wasn't done or something wasn't finished yet. So they had 150 first pressing done of 150 units, and to sell at their concerts. So this is one of 150 albums first pressing, and I bought it for like $5. I don't think they even knew what they had there. Anyway, so this is my version of an obscure record. Next question. Let's see. A group who you collect all of their albums or try to. So this is, I may be lying to myself. I didn't used to call myself a collector, but now I can't say that anymore. I have too many records, as my wife has pointed out. But I'm not trying to fill like a collection by a band. I don't even know what that would look like in terms of if you did the Beatles, for example, you would have to have both the UK version and the US versions because they're different songs on all the albums. They're all different up through, I think, Sgt. Pepper. And you would also have to have both the mono versions and the stereo versions because the Beatles only oversaw the mastering of the mono version. And so the mono and stereo versions are actually different masterings and sound different. And I'm just not there. It's not as important to me to have all of those records. Even if I buy all of the, I have tons of Dylan albums, all the early stuff. I try to get really nice early pressings, but I can't imagine getting all the stuff he did in the late 80s or 90s. I'm just not that interested in collecting something just to have all of something somebody did. Having said that, I have all of some albums, some of the group's albums, but it wasn't because I was collecting them. So I guess I would say that I don't have any groups or albums that I'm trying to collect all of. Number 7, a band whose second album is better than their first. This was not hard for me to answer at all. The band is Slint. They're from Louisville, Kentucky. They came out in the early or the mid 90s, I think, out of Louisville, Kentucky, from the punk scene there, which was really vibrant and happening. And their music was just so different. They call it post-rock now. The band has sort of a cult status. When they put out their first album, they were like 15 or 16 years old, and Steve Albini actually was the engineer for them. And it's good. It's a good album. I really like this album. But their second album, Spiderland, this is mind-blowing. This is an amazing album. What they do with this in terms of music, the dynamic shifts, the irregular time signatures that change within songs, and it's just, I don't even know how to describe it. I highly recommend, if you have not heard this album, to check it out. Lots of bands have been influenced by it. These guys broke up before the album was released. And there's actually a documentary, I'll put a link to the documentary below, called Breadcrumb Trail, and about the band and the creation of this album. And it's really worth seeing. It's quite interesting. Also, it's interesting. There was a lot happening in the music scene in Louisville at the time. And one of these, the friends of these guys took this photograph for them, and his name was Will Oldham. He's AKA Bonnie Prince Billy or Palace Brothers. So lots of good music coming out of Louisville, apparently in the mid 90s. Anyway, check this album out. It's definitely second album better than the first. Next, we have Show and Tell a Whack-A-Mole. Random picks. So I actually had my wife grab a handful of records here for me, and I'm just going to reach back and choose one and see what I got here. And oh, wow. God, look at the artwork on this. This is actually not the album cover. This is the sleeve. This is Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, Smashing Pumpkins. And this is the box set remastered, so I don't have the box. I just keep the sleeves like this. And it's so funny that I picked this because I was just watching, God, I'm not going to remember his name. One of the guys on the YouTube channels, he compares pressings of albums and helps you just determine what the best pressing of an album is. And he said this is the best pressing, and the problem with the first pressing was it came out in the 90s, and in order to fit it on 3 records instead of 4, they reorganized the songs in different orders, and it wasn't a very good pressing. So having heard that, I was very happy to have this one. So that's my whack-a-mole, and I'm sure most people know the Smashing Pumpkins, but this album in particular has such a huge array of music on it. It's so good. An album that I've listened to the most in my life. So honestly, Houses of the Holy is the album that I would have to choose. Part of the reason for this is because back when this album came out, we didn't have Spotify and iTunes and YouTube and all these ways to hear lots of different music. And music was expensive for a boy like me back then. So you buy an album and you play it to death. And so that's probably one of the reasons why this is the album I've listened to most. But also, even when I play it today, it holds up incredibly well. I love this album. So that's the album I probably played the most. House is the Holy by Led Zeppelin. And let's see, number 10, show an album, show an album with a crazy story. Okay, experimental indie rock band Menomina. They have had a cult status in Europe. They're probably more popular there than here. The band actually comes from Portland, and several of their albums, they have used artists that they know to do the album covers. And this artist, his name is Dan Atto. I'm actually going to put a link to his page down there too, so you can check out his art because he's really amazing. But here's the front and back of the cover. And why I'm showing this as a story is because I picked up this album actually fairly recently, but about probably 8 months before I picked this album, look at the picture in the middle there. I actually own the original painting. So I thought that was a worthwhile story to tell. So again, this is Menomina. I'm sure that they're not performing as Menomina anymore, but the albums are really creative, and the artwork is quite amazing. Let's see. A record from the year you were born. So I was born, and I'm choosing, this is actually out of order. This question comes later, but I wanted to choose this now because this album also serves as an answer to the next question. But the record from the year I was born in 1958, is Jazz Giants with Stan Getz and Jerry Mulligan and Oscar Peterson trio. I love Oscar Peterson, and he's also playing with Herb Ellis on guitar on this album, and I think he's amazing. And it's an album that I love from the year I was born. I like jazz. And I also wanted to keep this up here because the next question that I'm going to answer is, what is one of your collecting pet peeves? And I actually am aware that I'm not the only person who's using this as my pet peeve. I've heard at least 2 other people claim this. And I'm going to say it because I'm hoping if enough of us say it, somebody might actually do something about it. But my pet peeve is when they put price stickers on the album covers. And even worse when they put the price sticker on what's already a little bit torn, so that when you take the price sticker off, it tears even more and ruins the album covers. I don't know a better system. I know that if you put the price stickers on this, that people can remove them and change them out and try to fool you. But this is just horrifying that we could ruin beautiful album covers like that. So that's my collecting pet peeve. And the next one, an album or a genre people would be surprised to know that you like. So I have to answer this in terms of people that know me, that are my friends, because I don't have any other videos out and you don't know what I listen to. But I really have a guilty pleasure with Martin Denny's Exotica. I think I own 4 or 5 of these albums. To me, they're just such a delight to listen to. They're kind of kitschy. My wife talks about them as sort of a retro vacation cocktail hour album, and that's a good description. Also, this is the first pressing. I think I bought it for like $5, so you can get really good pressings of this pretty cheap. And so that's my guilty pleasure, my genre that you might not know that I enjoy and listen to. Let's see. The next one, show a 10-inch record or share your opinion on 10-inch records. So I don't have a strong opinion, and I don't buy a lot of 10-inch records. I have a few, and I'll show you one that I like. But my understanding is that when you're playing a record, that the closer because of the angle of the tone arm as you're playing the record, that the closer it gets to the label, the more the groove doesn't align, and it just creates some sound distortion problems, and so you don't get as good a sound. So that's one good reason not to buy 10-inch records, because you're basically playing in that area. And but I do have a couple of 10-inch records. I have a bunch of jazz that I like, that I just happened to find. But I also found this, and I love Tommy James and the Shondells. I grew up with these guys. And this is a first pressing, and I think it's an only version of this in a 10-inch record from the UK. They didn't do this in the US. I think this is first and only pressing of this 10-inch record with Tommy James. And it's basically their short, sharp shots. It's their greatest hits kind of at the time, which includes Crystal Blue Persuasion and Crimson and Clover and Moni Moni and stuff like that. And it's a great little album, and I listen to it all the time, and I got lucky getting this fairly cheap, and it's in mint condition. So there's my 10-inch records. And let's see, share an interesting fact about an album or a song. I'm sure that this isn't a secret. I'm sure there are other people who know about this, but I didn't until just recently. And that's that Alice Cooper, $1 Billion Babies, the title track on this album, which is this is an amazing album for Alice. It's a great album. $1 Billion Babies. There's a section in there sung by a British voice, and I was assuming it was a guitar player or somebody, but it turns out it's Donovan. Donovan, whose albums include stuff like A Gift from a Flower to a Garden, with songs like Wear Your Love Like Heaven, is actually singing something like I'm So Scared Your Little Head Will Fall Off in My Hand with Alice Cooper, which I think is just totally ironic and amazing, and makes me respect Donovan even more that he did this. And so check that out. Let's see, show an album with an animal on the cover. So I'm going to cheat. This is Santana's first album, first pressing, and you can see that there's a lion on the cover. And those of you who know this album know what I'm going to do next, and that is I'm just going to bring it a lot closer. And if you can get up there and see that, it's actually not a lion on the cover. There's a person standing with some faces around it in such a way that when you look at it, it looks like there's a lion on the cover. So I'm kind of cheating, but I love this album, and the lion is beautiful, however you look at it. It's also an incredible album. Let's see. Show an album with crazy artwork. So I'm gonna double up here on Menomina. This is another album of theirs, and the artist is Craig Thompson. And those of you who are familiar with graphic novels, he wrote one called Blankets. He has a number of others out as well. He's a crazy good artist, and this album, the cover is really wonderful. I talked to Craig about this, and he mentioned that it was sort of inspired by Led Zeppelin 3. It has a little spinning wheel here that creates different ways that you can see the picture, and there's like secret messages coded into it. Lots of, I don't know if you can see all this, but crazy art, really fun, good album, but this is about the artwork. So I highly recommend the album, but also Craig Thompson. And I'm going to put a link to Craig Thompson down below too, for those of you who don't know him. He's a great graphic novelist. And so crazy artwork. And show a really good album you can find for cheap. That depends on how you define cheap. If you're talking about dollar bin cheap, I have here an album I got in the dollar bins. It's Iron Butterfly Ball. I happen to like Iron Butterfly. This is the last album that they did that I liked. They kind of changed members and evolved into something different. This is still kind of psych rock like the earlier albums. And the cover's in, good condition, but the album is almost mint and it plays really well, and I got it in the dollar bins. But if you're talking about $5 records, this is a hard to find thing. This is the Monkees' first album. One of the ways you can tell if it's the first is it's Papa Gene Blues is spelled wrong. But what's amazing about this album also is that it's really hard to find a Monkees album that isn't scratched and played to death. Because if you like the Monkees, you played this all the time. And so finding a first pressing this in good shape is kind of hard to do. And when I found it and saw that it was the correct version with Papa Gene's Blues and took it up to the counter, the guy at the counter says, "Oh, you want an old Monkees album, huh?" And I gave him my $5 and walked out. So that's a cheap way to go. The other thing, though, that I want to bring in, an album that you could find for cheap, I'm a jazz fan, and I like Dave Brubeck and his quartet. And, one of the most popular jazz songs in the world is Take 5. He's amazing. And what I like about Dave Brubeck is all of the recordings are really well done. When you listen to his albums, if you sit in the line of your stereo speakers and just listen, it's like he's in the room on every recording. And so I have here two albums of his. I don't know if you can see this. These are the 6i Columbia labels, both of them, which I love labels. And this is just so exciting to see these old labels. And these are first pressings, and I got them for like $8 a piece. So several versions of cheap for you there. And show an album with an acquired taste. We're almost done. 2 more to go. This one and one more. This is 19. And, this is definitely acquired taste for me. This is Ariel Pink. Ariel Pink is a lo-fi indie artist who kind of dances around 70s and 80s pop music. And he takes it in interesting and demented ways. He's quite strange. And the first time I heard him, I really just couldn't quite get into him. I heard this album and it was okay. And it took me a while to really get him. And actually the song that really got me was he did a version of the song Baby, which is a not very well-known song by a not very well-known band called the Emerson Brothers. And the song is incredible. It's the only thing the Emerson Brothers did that I really could listen to. And his version of it is really remarkable. And when I heard that, I started diving into some of his other music and I was blown away. So I did acquire the taste for Ariel Pink. And unfortunately, Baby is not available on vinyl. You'd have to go to like iTunes or someplace like that to hear it, but I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. Last but not least, show your most recent find. So there's a record store in town called Little Axe Records, and I go there a lot. And I went in there 6 months ago, and they had a Duster album. I was asking about Duster, and he said, "Oh, I got one in the back here," and he pulls it out. It was a first pressing, and he gave me a good deal on it, and I was kind of blown away because it wasn't on the wall or on the shelf or anything. So whenever I go in there, I now am going to ask him what's in the back, but I went in another time and I found a couple albums that I really wanted. But I said, do you have anything in the back that you're not putting out? And he said, yeah, I put them on the wall, and if they don't sell, I just put them up on Discogs, and people in Portland may not like this kind of stuff. And I said, well, what do you got? And he said, one album I really like, and he pulls this album out, and I was just floored, is Philip Glass's Music with Changing Parts. This was his first composition and recording. It's from 1971. It's a first pressing, and it's in very, 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 very good plus condition. And I got a really good deal on it by asking. And so this is the most recent find. I love this album. It's hypnotic, mesmerizing. He uses 3 organs and a couple of horn players, a violin, and I don't know what else is in there, but it's the way he creates a mood and a feeling, and then he just makes you stay in it for a really long time. I really get off on that. So this is my most recent find. And I think that's it for this episode. I'm excited about doing some more of these. I hope you enjoy this. If you do, please let me know and subscribe. And I will be putting out some more other interesting videos. I'm going to try and do something next that talks about how I got involved in collecting, because I haven't been doing it that long, really. And thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll talk soon.